Hey,
Hello.
what's up, man? We just went live. Welcome to Unleashing Liberty Live. This is an economic framework for liberty, and I'm Asa J. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully, we'll get some commenters piling in to the external. I don't see anyone quite out there yet. You're probably used to some of these other shows that start 30 minutes late, but we're on top of it here, and we will start on time. So get here early if you don't want to miss the fuck stupid if you don't want to miss the first part of the show. So we're gonna give some quick intros of the panelists we have here, and then we'll get into it. Go ahead, Adam.
Hi, madam. I'm the bus driver.
But yo, Max.
Max and professional hanger-outer on Hangouts, apparently.
Jefferson.
I'm the guy here, apparently. I don't know.
Okay. And I am Asa J. If you want to follow my work on the police state, you can check me out at policestatedaily.com or copblock.org. You can also check some of us out on the Libertarian Brutalism Network for the more advanced courses that in libertarian thought that you will need to be imbibing in the coming months. But anyway, yeah, so I wanted to talk about some of this stuff last week, but we kind of got off into the Constitution and stuff, so I figured I'd save it and take a whole episode on it, because this is really the practical argument for liberty. I mean, these are arguments that really what brought me around from the constitutionalist position, from the minarchist position. And so it's important economics because it forms an intellectual defense, an intellectual framework for the defense of liberty, right? So when the big government dweebs are telling you this policy is good and we need, whatever it may be, a minimum wage or whatever, if you know economics, you can, this is completely bullshit. They're just trying to expand the power of government and dominion over people. But some of the central arguments that just smash the state are the socialist calculation problem, as brought forth in 1920 by the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises. So, and that article is called "Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth," and you can find a PDF of that, as well as a lecture by Dr. Joe Salerno breaking down Mises's arguments. So yeah, everything we talk about is going to be sourced. You can go to the description box and find out more details if you wish. But so Mises described the nature of the price system, right, under capitalism, and described how individual subjective values are translated into objective information, right, into objective money prices, right, that's necessary for the rational allocation of resources. So Mises argued that the pricing systems in socialist economies, or in more in what we're talking about, government, any government at all, right? The pricing system of government, or government central planning, or when government controls a certain industry, or has socialized the production of that industry, like police and defense. So without prices, without economic inputs, without feedback from the market, Mises argued, there can be no way to evaluate these goods and deploy them where they are most needed, right? So so they're essentially unpriced, right? And any kind of allocation of the resources is going to be necessarily irrational, because see, central planners wouldn't know how to deploy them, right? So, and you can go in more depth on this. We're going to talk more, even more about it. But in Mises' 1922 book, Socialism and Economic and Sociological Analysis, and in that work, he really took the argument a step further, arguing that the market price system is an expression of praxeology, of the study of action, which derives from the action axiom, which just means people employ scarce means to attain desired ends, right? People work in their own rational self-interest to attain their ends. And so this can't be replicated in any form of bureaucracy, right? Now, we'll talk a little bit about money. Perhaps some of the other guys on the panel would like to add to what I'm saying. If not, we can go on to money and talk a little bit more about Mises's arguments.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like, if you have a limited amount of time, energy, and obviously we all do, right? We live in a real world. We have a physical limitation of our body. We have a physical limitation of the resources that we have access to. You're going to want to use them in the most efficient means possible. And without a system to decide what's the most efficient means of doing so, I mean, it's just up in the air. And the Marxist system, which is what Mises was kind of responding to, it had a price fixing as a mechanism where, like, the central planners just say, well, this is worth X. And that doesn't actually come to what the most efficient way to produce it is, or what the best use of your time and energy is. It's just somebody saying this is X, and therefore that's what it is, and that's what you're going to pay for it. And that's going to create in me, the worker, the producer, a level of dissatisfaction with the system, because, you know, I feel like, well, I put a lot more time, a lot more effort, and a lot more energy into my product than Joe down the street, who, you know, half-assed it and put out a shoddy product, but they both cost the same. And, you know, that's kind of the problem with the whole thing. I mean, the labor theory of value is stupid too, but I mean, at least when you have price fixing, like a cartel that is, whether it's a government or another agency that's deciding on the prices, you can't have a good cost-benefit analysis of where to put your resources, time, energy, and so forth.
I mean, the thing is, though, is that prices are signals. And the signals say whether you should buy more or less or something. So, for example, if the price of milk is high, then people with less sort of like uses that people value less of milk are going to be obviously those take up less money or whatever. So the uses that are more important for milk are going to get priority, right? So, for example, if the price of milk goes high because the supply is down, because, I don't know, a bunch of cows died or something, then people who like milk for, I don't know, people who take a bath in milk, they're going to be like, oh, okay, that's too expensive, it's not worth it. But say, for example, people who use milk for, like, to feed their kids or whatever, those are going to be able to pay it, right? So prices are information that help you allocate resources in a manner that is efficient and in a manner that pleases most consumers. Which, I mean, consumers sounds like marketing or something, but consumers are everyone, right? And yeah, prices are signals.
I mean, there's producers and consumers.
Yeah. So if you distort the signals, you're gonna get surpluses and deficits that you wouldn't get otherwise. Just inefficiency. Yeah.
Yeah, price fixing of any variety, whoever institutes it, is going to create a system where inefficiency will thrive. Just by the very nature of it.
Right, and Adam gets into some good points that we'll expand on a little further here within the paradigm of money, or a means of exchange. So since capital goods and labor are highly heterogeneous, in other words, they have different characteristics, right, that pertain to physical productivity. So because of this, economic calculation requires a common basis for comparison, right, for all forms of capital and labor. So you know, a medium of exchange, a money, enables buyers to compare the costs of goods without having to have the underlying knowledge of the production process. So the consumer can simply focus on his own personal cost-benefit analysis. And so the price system is therefore said to promote, like we were saying, the economically efficient use of resources by agents who may not have this explicit knowledge, right? That may not have all the knowledge of all the conditions of production and supply. And as Adam mentioned, so this is signaling, right? This is the signaling function of prices, as well as the rationing function, which prevents overuse of any resource. And you know, people that don't understand supply and demand are very quick to deride the price gouger, right? You know, a couple of years ago when gas was supplies were dwindling here in my area, and you know, the gas stations had jacked up prices to, I believe it even got up to $10 a gallon here. And so, of course, the local government has to come in and, you know, put price controls and ration it. Right? No, this is the natural market process that says, wait, no, this resource is running out. Right? So, you know, the signal of the price, right, is going to preserve the signal of the quantity of the resource translated into prices as market demand as the resource dwindles, right? This is going to preserve the resource. As the price gets high, you know, people buy less. So this is the natural mechanism of the market and how prices signal to maintain resources, right? And you know, this is the natural market process, and without that process, right, to fulfill such comparisons in terms of supply and demand, there's no real way to compare different goods and services or rationally allocate, right, as we were saying. So I guess it's important to mention here, like the concept of marginal utility and time preference. Because the common basis for comparison for capital goods has to be put into the context of consumer welfare, right? So marginal utility really just refers to one's own subjective evaluation of a good or service. So in other words, how much your perceived gain from it, right? How much you gain from it. And so time preference simply refers to the ability to compare the desired trade-off between present consumption and delayed consumption, like you know, for greater returns later, like investment in capital goods, for example. So the best way to illustrate marginal utility and time preference is through the often touted suitcase or chest example. So imagine we're all in a room, right, and we're auctioning off a suitcase, or let's just call it a suitcase, filled with $5,000. So how much would you pay for it? Right? How much would you be willing to bid for that suitcase filled with $5,000 if you got it immediately? Right? If you got to get the suitcase immediately. Now think about how much you would pay for it if you wouldn't get it for a year, if you wouldn't get it for 6 months, 3 months. Right? So you're going to have a different subjective evaluation of how much you're going to be willing to pay for the case, right? So prices, the signals of prices, the price system accounts for that, can account for that, right? So marginal consumer expenditures represent the marginal utility or the perceived gain, or you know, consumer satisfaction expected by consumers as they spend money. So consumers will equalize their marginal utility, their amount of satisfaction, of the last dollar on each good. So the exchange of goods establishes prices, right, that represent the marginal utility of consumers, and money therefore represents consumer satisfaction, right, is representative of consumer satisfaction. And you know, this is what happens in a capitalist system when people are free to engage voluntarily, you know, or free to trade voluntarily. When there's private property and voluntary exchange, right? Prices develop. You know, how much are people willing to pay something? How much are they not? Right? And it's really a beautiful spontaneous order that emerges. But so if money is also spent on capital goods and labor, then it's possible to make comparisons between capital goods and consumer goods. So the exchange of consumer and capital and labor goods does not imply that capital goods are valued accurately. So only that it's possible for the valuations of capital goods to be made. So Mises argues that without the price system, government lacks the means to relate consumer satisfaction to economic activity. And as Adam says, this leads to surpluses and shortages, and disables entrepreneurs' ability to properly ascertain how to deploy resources optimally. So yeah, how do you get feedback from the market? You get it immediately. You get it by voting with your dollars on the open market, right? If a company screws you, right, you can withdraw your consent. You see, with government, it's the exact opposite. Not only are you forced to consent, but it has no way to properly ascertain your values. Sure, you can vote every 4 years for what you want it to do, for what you want politicians to do, but only in the market can your values really, can you really express your values through an economic system?
Well, it's an immediate accountability mechanism, right? Whereas the voting system, let's say they elect Trump, in this next election, right? And day one, he does something that everyone fucking hates. Everybody disagrees with it. Well, I mean, you could impeach him. Theoretically, that's months down the line. You could vote somebody else in. That's 4 years down the line. I mean, there's mechanisms that you could take to try and get accountability, but you're not even guaranteed. Whereas if a CEO of a company institutes a policy that you hate, you just don't buy from that company anymore. And if everybody stopped buying from that company because of what this person did or what product they put out or whatever, eventually the problem would solve itself because it would no longer be profitable. So accountability can only, in my mind, can only be achieved in a free market system.
Absolutely. And in terms of planning, in terms of government planning, even if the government created like an army of citizens, right, that eager to do the bidding of their masters, what are they going to do? How would they know what products to order their eager slaves to produce, right? I mean, at what stage of production, how much of the product at each stage, what techniques or raw materials to use in that production, and how much of each, and where specifically to locate all this production. How would they know their costs? How would they know their losses? By what process, can they ascertain that? And so Mises taught us that they can't. This is impossible. Government.
Oh. And even since Mises's writings, we have examples of that in action, right? Like Soviet Russia, millions of people starved in the Ukraine because they didn't have a means to allocate resources because they engaged in price fixing and, cronyism as well, but that's a whole separate issue. But I mean, they didn't allocate the resources effectively, and millions of people starved to death under Stalin. And the same thing happened in Maoist China. And so these systems that don't have an actual free market and engage in price fixing, time and time again show that they are incapable of allocating resources in the most effective and the most universally accepted manner.
Right. In any economy more complex than like the family unit or like Crusoe on a primitive island, planners simply just don't know what to do, or they can't tell what to do. They have no economic input, in other words, right? And you see this especially with the lines of production that traditional conservatives wish to preserve, like military and police and stuff. The socialist calculation problem doesn't go away for things like that, right? So in terms of police, it's like, well, they have no way to properly ascertain demand. They can look at crime statistics, they can, have their algorithms or, whatever the hell they do, but they're not going to be able to allocate protection in a way that's consistent with demand, like the market can. And we see this. We get surpluses and shortages. So this results in some areas being overprotected, some areas being underprotected. I mean, it's a total clusterfuck. When people say the government is incompetent, it's not just something people know. They can't do anything because they just simply don't have the economic input.
Not possible. It's not possible for them to be competent. It's just by the nature of their being. They just can't. I mean, and like even with the market that we have in America and most Western countries, it's still not a free market. The dollar has, as a currency, has its issues. It is controlled. I mean, because money itself is just another commodity. It's a medium of exchange. But when you start, you could use anything for money, right? Like you could pick shells up off the ground. We decide shells are the money. There's only this many shells. We could do. That's what primitive societies did. You could use gold. You could use whatever. But as long as it's a fair currency, as long as it is what it says it is, then it's going to give you a good value. But when they manipulate it and through inflation, deflation, changing interest rates, the fractional reserve system, and all these other things that they do to really mess with the money, it murkies the water even for actual private market free trade because it's being interfered with. So they're even interfering with and putting price controls in the system, even under the American system. It seems to be that's why there's a lot of economic problems that keep cropping up, and they will continue to do so. There will be bubbles and there will be bursts until something gives.
Absolutely, and we should talk more about Austrian business cycle, and when we get to the Fed, absolutely. But to hit on something else before we go there is entrepreneurship. This is something that is often overlooked in by mainstream economists and even neoclassical economists. But there's many primary conditions for economic calculation, right? But we're not going to go over them all here. But one of the very important ones is entrepreneurship. So, along with market rivalry, competition between entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs reap profits by supplying unfulfilled needs in the market, right? And so entrepreneurs therefore bring prices closer to marginal costs, and the adjustment of prices in markets toward what's called equilibrium, or rather where supply and demand meet or are equal. This gives greater utilitarian significance. So in other words, the activities of entrepreneurs make prices more accurate, right, in terms of how they represent the marginal utility of consumers, the perceived gain, net benefit to consumers. So prices act as guides to the planning of production, and those who plan production use prices to determine which lines of production should be expanded, which should be curtailed. If the price of something is if this dude's building a wagon or whatever the hell he's building, and he notices that the price of one particular metal is through the roof, well, that's a signal, right? So maybe it would be more optimal to employ a different metal in this particular case. So the signals as gleaned by entrepreneurs are very important to the economic system as a whole. And see, under government, when a particular line of production is socialized, or under a socialist regime, entrepreneurs they have no profit motive, right? So they're far less likely to attempt to supply and meet consumer demands. So without the price system to match consumer utility to incentives for production, or even indicate those utilities without providing incentives, the central planner is much less likely to invest in new ideas to satisfy consumer desires, right? And we see this in every communist paradise that's ever existed. I mean, like in Russia, where everybody wears the big burlap fucking sack or whatever. There's no style. There is no, in the only goods in terms of clothing that were catering to consumer preference were brought by the black market, by the free market, who brought in Nikes and blue jeans and Beatles records and all this stuff. So yeah, the state planner can't take consumer preference into account like entrepreneurs, right? And because of the price system and the signals gleaned by entrepreneurs promotes economic growth, promotes innovation. So, okay, anybody want to say anything more about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, you should also premise this with the fact that money and free exchange usually it allows for the division of labor. So when you distort the price mechanism, you get people, like maybe having to grow their own food, or maybe having to, sort of dabble in other subjects or hobbies that they aren't very skilled or experienced at, because the price is so distorted on, like maybe like organic foods, or because of sugar subsidies or whatever, but when you have free exchange, it allows people to do what they're best at, right? So it's most efficient because I can go and do what I'm best at, maybe fishing, and then I can sell my fish to people who can go and do what they're best at, which is maybe, farming, so.
Right. I mean, the labor is in a market like that is just another commodity. So the best person at labor is going to be worth the price that you're paying for them as the employer, the entrepreneur. And yeah, you're right. With a murky price system, that's going to get all thrown out the window too. And you can see that again in all these different communist regimes throughout the 20th century, that you would get like guys who are skilled scientists. The communist regime would come in and they'd put them on a production line, stamping out boot soles or something, and it turns out that guy's a freaking rocket scientist, and you just set back your country's space program by 50 years or whatever. But definitely, when you're discussing these topics, people do have to include in their mind that labor is just another commodity. And the division of labor will spontaneously come about through the marketplace. It doesn't need to be controlled by a central planner, because, as always said, the cream will rise to the top, and you're going to want to pick the best guy to do the work for the price that you can. Or maybe you want to pick, 3 half-ass guys, to do the job for less money. I mean, if that's a more effective means. But certainly those things all have to be accounted for.
Yeah, and I mean, even with like the current exchange systems or economies, there's still a monopoly on money, right? So like maybe it would be more efficient to use gold than fiat currency or silver, or etc. So there is no free market, right? If the economy is bad, it's distorted. It's not capitalism's fault. So yeah, just throw that out there.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Like our money system in the West, pretty much every Western country now, is based on fraudulent money. It's not honest money. There's so much weighing it down. But in a perfect quote unquote free market, the money itself would be neutral, right? Like it wouldn't mean anything except numbers on a chart. That's all it's supposed to be. It's a ledger. It's an account balance sheet. That's what it's supposed to be. But when you start interfering with that money, that's a form of price control. Actually, I would say that's the most prevalent form of price control in the modern world, and it's not just the modern world, because you can go back and find examples anywhere there's ever been a central bank. There's been this form of price manipulation.
Absolutely, and again, yes, we are going to get into the Fed here in a bit when we discuss monopoly and competition. But let's go over before that one other condition that is pertinent for successful economic calculation. So this is coordination, right, or coherent planning among those who plan production, among entrepreneurs. So the problem of planning production is a knowledge problem. So this was first put forth by Mises and later really expanded on and explained by F.A. Hayek. And as I said, when we started out, all these resources are in the description box. Look into this stuff, read these papers. This is going to be pertaining to Hayek's 1937 work, Economics and Knowledge. And then he again expanded in greater detail on this in 1945 with the use of knowledge in society. So these PDFs, lectures, videos, they're in the description box. Take advantage of them. So, as I said, building on the earlier work of Mises and others, Hayek argued that while in centrally planned economies, an individual or a select group of individuals must determine the distribution of resources, planners, can never have enough information to carry out this allocation reliably. And this obviously applies to the socialist calculation problem and price signals and being able to properly ascertain information that way. But it's deeper than that, right? It's just a matter of knowing. There's just the socialist planner. There's no way to know everything, because everybody has their own localized knowledge. On the small on the small scale in municipal areas, right? If a socialist planner is trying to find out the most efficient route to build his his highway on, or to tell people even to come to a place of business by, well, the local person is going to know, well, that route technically is shorter in terms of distance, right? But I can get there quicker this other way, and that's just kind of like a rudimentary example. But the socialist planner, there's no way to know. You just can't know, right? So Hayek's argument goes kind of like this: within capitalism, the overall plan for production is composed of individual plans from capitalists in large and small enterprises. Excuse me. So, since capitalists purchase labor and capital out of the same common pool of available but scarce labor and capital, it's essential that their plans fit together in at least some sort of semi-coherent fashion. So Hayek defined an efficient planning process as one where all decision makers form plans that contain relevant data from the plans of others. So entrepreneurs acquire data on the plans from others through the price system, as we've already explained. And the price system is an indispensable communications network, as we have said, for the planning of coordination among entrepreneurs. So increases and decreases in prices inform entrepreneurs about the general economic situation to which they can adjust their own plans. So, like I said, that this goes far deeper than the price system. And to illustrate this, just think about a ham sandwich, right? It's some of you have probably heard. Just think about a ham sandwich. Some of you have probably heard, the I-pencil and about all these production processes coming together organically to form this pencil. Think of a ham sandwich, right? This is Rothbard's example. How is the Socialist Planning Board going to make this ham sandwich? right? Can they do what the market can do? Can, you know, think about just what goes into a ham sandwich. Think about the bread alone, right? So a farmer has to raise that wheat. A farmer needs petrol, right, or gas or whatever to run his machines on. Where did that gas have to come from? Where did the resources for those machines to even run on that gas come from? There's a whole other production process in that, right? How do they even get there? You know, think about the you know, the pigs. Somebody had to raise the pigs. Somebody had to slaughter the pigs. The butcher, you know, had to exist. And there's all this division of labor and different parts of production that go in. Just think about that, right? But we get that ham sandwich, right? There are no ham sandwich shortages, okay? And you know, think about everything that has to go into the distribution network. You know, the packers and the retailers and the transport and how could a government ever do that in any type of with any type of efficiency? They simply can't, right? So everybody has that example. Not only illustrates the efficiency of the market, but it illustrates that everybody has their own localized knowledge and their own, you know, self-interest that government is unable to properly ascertain, right? And are going to work on that knowledge in a way that governments never could. So Hayek argues against the establishment of what was called at the time the Central Pricing Board, which was like a proposal of this other economist and stuff. But you know, the same principle applies to any line of production that's been socialized by government, right? Military, police, education, whatever. So Hayek highlighted the dynamic and organic nature of market price fluctuations and the benefits of this phenomenon. So he asserted that a centrally planned market could never match the efficiency of the open market because any individual knows only a small fraction of all of which is known collectively, right? So a decentralized economy that complements the dispersed nature of information throughout society, in Hayek's words, this is a marvel, right? This is a marvel in the case that, like that of a scarcity of one raw material, without an order even having to be issued, right? Without more than perhaps a handful of people knowing the cause. You know, tens of thousands of people perhaps who identify, or excuse me, forget the last about that. So, yeah, like in the case of the scarcity of one raw material, without an order being given, without, you know, bureaucratic papers having to be signed, without only but a handful of people knowing that this has even occurred, you know, the market springs into action because people are pursuing their own rational self-interest, right? Because people want to profit, and you know, the profit incentive is derided. You're evil if you want to make profits. But in a free market, how do you profit, right? You profit by fulfilling someone's needs, and profit shouldn't be a dirty word. But I don't know. My notes were kind of jumblated on that last little bit. I hope I did Hayek's knowledge problem justice. Perhaps some of you others may want to weigh in, but the central point is, as for socialism, Mises and Hayek insisted that you know, bureaucrats and individual ministries and governments, they just can't coordinate their plans without a price system, and they simply don't have enough knowledge to do so to begin with, right? But you know, these were some of the fundamental economic arguments that made me really recognize the inefficiency of the state. And if you want a much better explanation of them, again, check out the resources. And yeah, does anybody have anything to comment on the knowledge problem or Hayek? And then we'll get into monopoly and competition.
Yeah, so the main point is that government doesn't get incentives, right? It doesn't understand them. It doesn't even have the information of what the incentives are, and there's always, as a result of that, unintended consequences. So, say for example, take welfare. I think Rothbard wrote about it. It was touted as, well, help people when they're down, and they'll get, they'll rise up and they'll get jobs and blah blah blah. The unintended consequence of that, because obviously they haven't thought about the incentives, it has actually incentivized poor people to stay on welfare or to get more welfare or milk the system as such. And that only expands the sort of the welfare program, right? And that's the unintended consequence, right? But it was primarily, like, its objective was to get people off of it. So yeah, I mean, when you don't have the right incentives, the opposite usually happens. So incentives are basically everything. Like, Mises wrote about it in Human Action, because it is like human action, right? It's whatever people want to do or is in their best interest to do in economics.
Or even what they perceive to. So if you give bad incentives, people make bad choices, as we can see via the welfare state in this country now. It incentivizes a lot of people. Like I know certain people that they'll say, well, I could go out and get a job, but then I'd lose my benefits and things of that nature. I mean, that's an incentive too. It's just in the wrong direction, and certainly they apply to every situation. That's why, people say, oh, well, economics, that's just for nerds. Like, economics is everything, and if you start to understand that, then you start to understand the world around you a lot better.
Yeah.
For shizzle, I guess we'll move on to monopoly and competition. One of my favorite topics, and this information is entertaining. At least to me, it is. It's very interesting because monopoly is something we're told just run rampant all over the laissez-faire economy of the early United States, and it was the benevolent government that had to come save us all, etc. But so I guess it'd be pertinent to define monopoly, or at least in the traditional sense, the currently accepted sense, and then get into what monopoly really is, what it really means. So monopoly is a specific person or enterprise being the only supplier of a particular good or service. So monopolies are thus characterized by a lack of economic competition to produce a good or service, or a lack of viable substitute goods, and the existence of high monopoly prices, well above the firm's marginal cost, right? That's kind of like the traditional definition of monopoly, to restrict output while raising prices, basically. So the verb monopolize refers to a process by which a company gains the ability to raise prices or exclude competitors. In economics, a monopoly is simply a single seller, as we said. So if a business entity gains a significant majority of market share, they're not necessarily a monopoly. If you're going by this currently accepted definition that they must be restricting output and raising prices. So that's kind of the modern conception of monopoly. But so now let's get into what it really means. So a monopoly is a grant of privilege by the state. Okay. And this has always been the accepted definition of monopoly, a state-granted privilege, right, reserving a certain area of production to one particular individual or group, right? The government, endows this specific monopoly onto a provider, and this has always been the case. The definition of monopoly, in the modern context, goes back to common law, to English common law, and acquired a great political importance in England during the 16th and 17th centuries, when a historic struggle took place between the classical libertarians and the crown over the use of monopoly, right, as opposed to freedom of production and enterprise. So under this definition of the term, it's not surprising that monopoly took on connotations of sinister interest and tyranny in the public mind. So the enormous restrictions on production and trade, as well as the establishment by the state of a monopoly caste of favorites, right, were objects of vehement attack for centuries. And like I said, this has always been the classical definition of monopoly, even up to the modern progressive era of the 20th century. And monopoly is always historically understood to be state privilege. I just really want to hammer that home. And like one of the examples that are often given, like in medieval times, is like the grain merchant. What I'm saying? The grain merchant would be endowed by the king, by the theocratic state, with a geographical monopoly to be the sole producer of grain or provider of grain for that area, right? And so in return, the king takes 15% or whatever, right? This has always been the story of monopoly. Monopolies only can exist with the state, with the state, and this, like the merchant example, feeds into like the old guild systems and stuff. Is essentially a form of state protectionism. So as I said, monopolies can only be sustained by government, and this is done by endowing special privileges to favored corporations, which are not free market entities, by the way, and we'll talk more about that. But so these privileges include like limited liability, selectively enforced regulation, selectively enforced taxation, or rather tax breaks that your competitors don't get, stuff like that. So stuff like this creates a huge barrier of entry to any type of competing business that is not favored by the state. And that is what creates monopolies, right? And like I said, until the progressive era, this was always how monopoly was understood. And monopoly is not a free market danger. Anywhere you find monopoly, you're going to find a government propping it up in one way or another. So we're going to tackle more historical examples of so-called monopolies, but just to come out and swing, let's talk about De Beers, because De Beers is one of these companies that people always bring up. Monopolies exist, free market capitalism's evil, right? So De Beers, there's no free market in diamonds, right? The South African government nationalized all the diamond mines. Even diamonds that haven't even been discovered. So the government lays claim to all diamonds in their territorial monopoly. So when people discover diamonds, even on their private property, they don't own. The state confiscates it. Mine operators, because of this, who lease mines from the state must get a license by the government. Thomas Woods points out that by an interesting happenstance, the licensees have all wound up being either given to De Beers itself or operators willing to distribute their diamonds through the De Beers Central Selling Organization. So, and of course miners trying to distribute diamonds in defiance of these government restrictions face stiff penalties. So it's precisely the opposite. It's precisely because of the government that the diamond trade is monopolized, right? Not the free market. De Beers is, yes, it's an example of monopoly, but understand that monopolies are created by the state, right? So, and here's where I wanted to get into about the Federal Reserve, and I'll say just a short bit, and then open things back up. Yeah, so the Fed's another thing that we're told, well, the Fed's bad because it's private, right? It's bad because it's private. And people get the wrong conception, when they hear Alex Jones and some of these so-called economists like Max Kaiser and Gerald Celente talk about the evilness of the Fed and the private Fed. It's because it's private that it's so bad. So this is another perfect example of what I'm talking about, actually. So in 1913, the government endowed monopoly money creation privilege onto the Fed. Right, because the Fed's private has nothing to do with anything, right? So, and it's important to distinguish between, a private monopoly that has been endowed with privilege by the government and market competition, right? No, what we want is private banking. But we want competition in it. We want people to be able to choose what they want to use as their medium of exchange. Gold, silver, Bitcoin, a labor-backed currency. Fiat banking even. Some Austrians will defend that say can exist, or not fiat, but fractional reserve banking that can exist in a free market. If people understand the terms of their contract, but that's a whole other issue. We won't get into that. So I'm sorry for even mentioning it. But yeah, no, we want market competition in the creation of money. We want a free market in money, where currency is provided by the open market with the best winning out over time. And I just want to make that distinction, because it's very important. The Fed's not bad because it's private. It's bad because it's a private entity that's given monopoly privilege by the state. So, and with that, I'll let some others speak.
Well, and it's also, the blatant manipulation of the money. That they don't even hide the fact that they do that, right? Like they have, these big public press conferences, and we're gonna lower the interest rates. I believe the interest rate's at 0 right now, which is basically like they're even having a hard time giving away their money right now. It's lost so much confidence. But they manipulate it through the debt that's attached to it. Not to get too deep into it, but the fractional reserve system, where each dollar is actually $1.30 or whatever in debt that's paid back to the Fed by the banks. So you're actually, each dollar that you earn costs more than it's worth in your pocket. Which is, it's very tough to have a free market with that kind of albatross hanging around the neck of the money itself. The money itself should just be money, right? And ideally you would back it up with something so that if anything happened, like gold, but they removed the gold standard and now it's backed, literally they say, by consumer confidence, and I'm not even sure I know what that means per se, but it's certainly not very high right now. Whatever it is. And the problem with that is if people start saying, well, I don't have much faith in the dollar, and if that becomes a meme and catches on, then the dollar will literally tank itself. And that's a lot of burden on a currency, which is supposed to be just the medium of exchange. So even if you took government out of the equation and just had a central bank, whether private or public does not matter, you would have the same effect of essentially neutering a free market before it even has a chance to take hold. That's why you want competing currencies. You want Bitcoin, you want a market in gold, you want all these other Bitcoin-esque things, you want bartering, you want all of these things simultaneously. And then, in the end, the best will win. But when somebody, like the American government, it was particularly bad in the 1800s, says, nope, this is the currency you have to use, and we're going to do whatever we want with it. We're going to change it the way we want with it. And then in the 1970s, we're going to take it off the gold standard too. It's really tough to trust the prices that the market provides, that we've said all along are so important to the process of a free market, when there's this shady cabal of people deciding on a daily basis what your money is worth, throwing more out there, making all kinds of shady deals about interest rates and debt, and it really, you can't have a free market with a central bank. It's just not how it works.
Maybe we should get into interest rates a little bit. Perhaps Adam could speak on Austrian business cycle theory and why interest rates are so important.
Well, like everything, interest rate, you could argue that it is a price, and it signals whether what the market is demanding, right? So, for example, if the interest rate is very high, that is to say, you're gonna be paying a lot of money to borrow money, then it favors long-term investment. So, for example, things like houses and sort of big products like that, right? So if the interest is high, that means that consumers are needing those kind of goods. If the interest is low, then it signals the opposite, right? So like ventures that are very profitable very fast. So yeah, so not things like houses, but say, for example, I don't know, like startups, like say things like Facebook or whatever. And obviously the problem is when you regulate the interest rate. When you don't have like an organic central bank, which, well, okay, so a central bank is just a bank for banks, right? But if you have a state, then the central bank is sort of the thing that makes the money and sets the interest rate for everybody and makes the currency with which you can pay your taxes, right? So it distorts everything, and it's probably the worst regulation of all the regulations, because money is half of every transaction, right? So there's already like a misallocation and inefficiency literally in every transaction. So it's no wonder the economy doesn't go well. So yeah, it's probably, yeah, if you could get rid of one thing, it would probably have to be the Fed. So yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Well, so sorry. So regarding the business cycle theory, so if you have like an interest rate that's artificially low or artificially high, then this gives an incorrect signal to entrepreneurs, right? So if it's artificially low, then they think, okay, so I'm gonna go make houses, and they do make houses, and people do like leave their job and become like laborers and get in the housing industry. But then when after a while, then it becomes obvious that, okay, so the interest rate was artificially high, therefore we shouldn't have been making houses, and that's when busts happen, right? So everything deprices, and that's what the marketing crisis was about. It was a misallocation of resources. So people were building houses that they shouldn't have been building because no one wanted them. So obviously the price went to the floor. And another issue that discusses that since so many people were diverting from their productive efforts to work in building houses and all this, then now all these people are unemployed and they lost time. And all the, like, there's a lot of output that was lost from these people working on housing. Which, again, so yeah, it's just a mess. You shouldn't, end the Fed and stuff.
For shizzle. Yeah, that great, what was it called? I can't remember. Some of the, looking at some of the old Occupus drawings of the Fed from the early 1900s and stuff. Yeah, that truly was the raping of the country and the selling off of the economic future of every American. It's a fucking abomination. It really is. But yeah, to move on and talk a little bit more about monopoly and competition, it's important to discuss the topic within the framework of regulation, right, and antitrust measures, like we're talking about. And it's important to consider that most of these measures always come about, not from the public, right, not from concerned consumers. They come from sour grapes businessmen that want to drive out their competition because they can't compete, right? And so economists call this rent seeking, though I don't technically necessarily agree with the term. But it's popularly known as rent seeking. So this is a concept used to describe the activity of individuals or firms who attempt to obtain or maintain wealth transfers with the help of the state. Okay. Now, more specifically, instead of of making a productive contribution to the economy. A rent seeker attempts to obtain benefits for themselves by manipulating the political environment. All right, and so, you know, we talked last week about, you know, the difference between the political entrepreneur and the market entrepreneur, the voluntary entrepreneur, right? Those who use the force of the state and versus those who interact voluntarily. Okay, so rent seeking has also been defined as the process whereby one is able to obtain a greater rent or return, an extraction than what would have been possible in the free market through activities like government lobbying, taking advantage of other connections to the state. So this is really just an unproductive and wasteful activity, right? That offers no net benefit to society, because it results in wealth being transferred from productive individuals and firms to the rent seekers, right? So, and this is sometimes referred to as crony capitalism or corporatism, even, you know, sometimes. And it's important to distinguish again. You know, capitalism is an economic system free from the state, right? A system of voluntary exchange and private property without interference by the state or otherwise, right? So if the state's involved, it's not free market capitalism, right? So like some recent examples of rent seeking would include things like, you know, the government bailouts, any subsidy, or the state enforcing barriers to entry via regulation. And so a real good real world example of this currently playing out across the global landscape is Uber, right? So Uber are really true free market entities, companies like Uber, Lyft, Sidecar, and for the most part, you know, while they can, they operate outside of government regulation, allowing consumers to voluntarily choose from a variety of drivers in their area, right? So if you're unfamiliar with Uber, yeah, it's a smartphone app. You use the smartphone app, it connects you to someone who needs a ride with someone willing to provide it. It's already in use in hundreds of cities in 55 countries around the world, and it's grown in popularity because, you know, it's a cheaper alternative. Consumers generally pay less than they would for a cab with faster service, right? So, and there are internal mechanisms, and this is the great thing about the market, and, you know, reputation, and, you know, the organic regulation of the market. So Uber drivers, the company Uber, don't want to employ dangerous drivers, right? And that have been highly successful. If you look at like the comparison between like taxi drivers that kill people and like Uber drivers that kill people, it's not even a comparison. But every time an Uber driver does anything, there'll be 50 mainstream media news articles about it. But yeah, so drivers are subject to background checks, vehicle inspections, insurance requirements. All is required by the company. And you know, there's other steps taken to make sure riders aren't harmed or scammed as well. And like I said, that's their reputation. The Uber app allows riders to rate drivers, and so that data becomes accessible to future potential passengers. So if a driver's rude or reckless, he's going to get a poor rating, right? And he won't make any more money. People aren't going to want to get in his car. And so this form of reputational enforcement has kept Uber safe and successful. And payments are handled electronically through the app, no cash, with Uber, the company, getting about 20% cut. So yeah, and another benefit is because the driver and passenger agree on the price beforehand, passengers don't, you don't have to worry about getting long hauled, or like you don't have to worry about a meter, like you would in a cab. So the reason I bring up Uber, like I said, within the context of regulation, is because it's a very pertinent current example. Because think about this, right? Without a large barrier of entry imposed by government licensing and regulation, everybody with a car is a potential small business owner, right? So this is what regulation truly seeks to prevent: competition against established financial interests, right? So regulations on transportation purposes are intended, we're told, right, to protect consumers, but for the most part, they only succeed in raising prices and reducing quality of service. And the Mercatus Center, which is a relatively good free market economic institute think tank, has done a report on this, and I'm going to reference some of the things that they've said. I don't think I have included a link in the description box to this, but if you're watching this in the future, I should have one added if you want to, by then, if you want to check it out. So yeah, the Mercatus Center. The report's authors, economics professor Stuart Dope, Adam Smith, that's all, contend that the ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft are, quote, revolutionizing taxi cab and transportation services, but have come under fire from entrenched interest groups that use government, they say, to protect their privileges and stifle market innovation, a process known as rent-seeking that we talked about. So the goal of rent-seeking, the economists explain, is to create higher profits by lobbying politicians to impose costly regulatory burdens such as licensure, safety prescriptions, and price controls on their new competitors. And to put this in context, and yeah, I'll have to include some links to Williams's work as well. But to put this in context, George Mason University economics professor Walter E. Williams says this: It doesn't take a lot of money to become a taxi owner-operator and earn more than $40,000 a year. So one needs a car, an insurance policy, and auxiliary interior equipment to make the car a taxi. So in New York, to be a taxi owner, you'd have to purchase a license called a medallion, the dreaded taxi medallions, that now cost upwards of $850,000 a piece. And they've even been as high as over $1 million in the past. So New York's taxi and limousine commission restrictions, Williams says, that generate such a license price essentially outlaw taxi ownership by people who don't have access to $850,000. So by contrast, Williams says, in Washington, D.C., where the annual fee of a license to own a taxi is just around $300, he says, I'll let you guess which city has more taxis per capita, cheaper fares, and more minority taxi ownership. There are vested interests who benefit from keeping outsiders out and therefore enrich both companies with large fleets and single taxi owners at the expense of the would-be owners and the riding public through higher prices. And yeah, so Uber and the taxi cab industry is a really good example of what we're talking about here. How these entrenched interests, these taxi unions, these big taxi companies, the government cartelized transportation industry, how they are fighting a war. Governments all over the world are essentially fighting a war against Uber right now. Look at what the taxi unions or the taxi drivers were doing. Where was it? France a while back, and just burning shit and all kinds of shit, man. So you would think, right, that government, who's supposed to be concerned about the welfare of the poor and want to help people and stuff, like they should revel in the idea of an Uber, of cheap and voluntary transportation alternative for the poor, right? Like, you would think people concerned about the poor would really want poor people to have jobs and cheap transportation options and stuff. But how have governments respond? They've raided Uber. They've CEO roundups, fines, outright legislative bans in some countries, organized stings, raids against drivers, etc., etc., etc. And it's a fucking travesty. And this is a struggle that's always existed, right? Against those that want to be free and those that want to fucking control us. Right, Rothbard called this, the struggle between power and market. Right, the struggle between these entrenched fucks and the rest of us. And like I said, this has been going on since the beginning of history. It's nothing new, but hopefully with a unified ideology, like libertarianism and moral and practical arguments against the power of the state, we can begin to erode it. And you know, I'm optimistic about things, and I think we're seeing some of that stuff already start to happen. But so yeah, anybody have anything they want to say before I move on?
I've just shared the stream, so enjoy that.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. So another good illustration of this type of fuckery, right, is the classic example of what was called the Chicago Beef Trust. Okay. So Chicago meat packers developed the first system of refrigerated rail cars that allowed meats to be shipped longer distances at lower cost than had ever been able before. So, in fact, Chicago meats were, by and large, 80% cheaper to consumers than meats being sold by local farmers, you know, in some areas where these meats were being shipped in. So, upon witnessing this new competition, Midwestern farmers lobbied Senator, I believe it was either George or Nathan Vest. I can't quite recall, but they lobbied Senator Vest to break up the horrid Chicago Beef Trust, right? Who had the audacity to provide people with a superior and cheaper product. So yeah, so consequently, this is the root of, like I said, most all regulation. Sour grapes businessmen who can't compete lobby and bribe politicians to destroy their competitors with antitrust cases and regulations and shit, right? And this is always done under the auspices of protecting against unfair competition or egalitarian social justice, right? And yeah, that's social justice, ensuring that everyone suffers by having to pay, in the Chicago Beef Trust example's case, 80% higher meat prices. So, you know, in other words, if you're worried about monopolies, you should be worried about government. You should be not worried about freedom. You should not be worried about entrepreneurs and liberty and free markets. You should be worried about government, because it is only through government protection that corporations can monopolize, and that's precisely the problem, right? As we said, governments grant selective privilege onto these corporations, limited liability, selectively enforced regulation, taxation, etc. And so this creates monopoly privilege and lack of choice and a huge barrier of entry for competitors. So yeah, this is not a free market. Corporations are not free market entities. In a true voluntary system, these government protection privileges wouldn't exist, right? Which means individuals that ran businesses would be held personally accountable for their actions, right? And you know, because the standard objection to a free society is the corporations are going to take over, man. You know, and it's just not the case. There's been no historical example of monopoly, of natural monopoly, lasting any significant length of time without the state, right? And you know, just in terms of corporations and how, you know, how they're in bed with the government, you know, take an example, a local example from here where I live in the western part of North Carolina. So Duke Energy was caught polluting something like 30 waterways in my state. This has been a couple years back. So if I want electricity in my area, I'm essentially forced to buy from Duke Energy because it has the government granted energy monopoly. So I mean, yeah, if your house is built up to run off kerosene or something, yeah, you can go that route. But no, in my area, Duke has the energy monopoly as granted by government. So when Duke polluted all these waterways and ponds and shit, like over 30, that's probably an old number. It's probably a lot more. So did white knight government just come in and save North Carolina water from the big nasty corporation? Of course not. You know, because of these selective government privileges that eliminate genuine competing free market businesses, Duke can do whatever it wants, right? It can pollute with impunity, precisely because of government, not in spite of it. You know, there was competition in energy production in my area. Well, if Duke polluted a bunch of waterways, most people are not going to buy from them anymore, and they're going to go out of business, right? So it is only by government that Duke is even allowed to exist in my fucking state. And yeah, so this, like I said, this happened a couple years back. So what happened? Did they save us? Did the government save us? Of course not. They I think they fined the company Duke, right? So this is the problem. Corporations, limited liability. They fined the corporate fiction Duke Energy like $50,000, and now the North Carolina State EPA, environmental protection lawyers, are now defending Duke Energy in civil cases. I mean, Jesus Christ. Perhaps it affects me more than because I live here in this state, but yeah, that shit like that makes me steam from the ears. So yeah, I guess we get in. I don't want to really get into the so-called natural monopolies, but just to mention it right quick. So natural monopolies are a monopoly theorized, or is a theoretical construct because they've never existed. But they're said to be a monopoly in the industry in which it's more efficient to have a monopoly for production. Or in other words, for production to be permanently concentrated in a single firm rather than contested competitively. And of course, this is absolute bullshit. This is just something court economists and state of violence apologists came up with in their Ivy League schools to rationalize government taking over infrastructure, right? Utilities are a natural monopoly, so the government might as well monopolize it, you know, shit like that. So, but yeah, just to hit on it, there's one problem with the natural monopoly theory. There's literally no historical examples that exist where this has occurred ever. There's no evidence of the natural monopoly story ever being carried out of one producer achieving lower long-run average total cost than everyone else in the industry and thereby establishing a permanent monopoly. It simply doesn't exist. But I just wanted to reference natural monopoly. If you want to learn more, there's a great article and lecture in the description box by Dr. Thomas DiLorenzo called The Myth of Natural Monopoly to just smash that out of the park for you. But yeah. As I said earlier, remember the important distinction we made in the first episode between political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. The political entrepreneur succeeds by using the implicit violence of government to cripple his competitors and harm consumers. The market entrepreneur, on the other hand, makes his fortune by providing consumers with products they need at prices they can afford, right? And maintains and expands his market share by remaining innovative and responsive to consumer demand. So it is really only the political entrepreneur that deserves our condemnation. But both types are indiscriminately attacked in popular culture that has deformed American public opinion on the topic. So, and we'll talk about some of these some of these entrepreneurs a little now as well. But I will ask if we have any comments from the internal here.
Well, as to the natural monopoly thing, a semi-example of why that might be a bad thing is actually, and I hope we don't get shut down for me saying this, is Google, right? Google is by far the largest entity on the internet. Most people use YouTube. Most people use Google for their search engine. Gmail is, I believe, the #1 or #2 email service. And as much as everybody's using Google, and it has a semi-monopoly on the internet for various purposes, people bitch about everything it does. It does things very inefficiently. We're using the Google Hangouts program, and as we've discovered on several occasions doing other shows, the control mechanisms that we're provided with are terrible and don't prevent issues that we could run into in the future. And there's no incentive for them to provide it because there's actually no, like, the reason we're still using Google Hangouts, there's no real viable alternative that offers the same services. And as we can see, if a competitor popped up and said, I'm offering exactly what Google Hangouts does, but you have controls, over what you're doing, we'd be there, right? Like no doubt about it. But that's the danger of the natural monopoly. Now, it's not actually a monopoly. There are other search engines, there's other video sites, but it's in that tricky place where, like, they're not even really considered much competition to them.
Yeah, one way to interpret it is the idea of, like, having a monopoly on news, right? So if it was like just one newspaper, like, what the fuck would you want on the front page? Like, everyone would be scrambling for like a little bit of column text or stuff like that. Because this is where the subjective theory of value comes in, right? Because everyone wants different things. Like some company might do one thing better than the other, and you get this sort of consumer split, which is good because it's what everyone naturally wants. A monopoly can't provide, or very, very few monopolies can provide things that everybody wants, right? So you need to have that sort of consumer choice.
Yeah, but I think Max brings up a good point in terms of, like I said, and we're going to get into some of the work that's been done on the subject that have looked into, like, the antitrust cases and looked at firms who were accused of being monopolists, and we have found now that none of these firms ever exhibited the definition of monopoly, restricting output and raising prices. But I think Max brings up a good point that if a monopoly existed in a free market, if somebody was able to gain majority share, that's good, right? That's, they did that voluntarily. They did that by providing the best service at the lowest cost available, and as chosen by the market. Google is the best right now, right? And there's probably something to be said, like, about the corporate fiction and of Google, and like we were talking about corporations and stuff, as well as like telecommunications regulations and stuff like that. But
I mean, they didn't become the semi-monopoly that they are independently, so it's not really a natural monopoly, but I felt like it was a good example of what I was trying to get across, because they definitely used the power of the state to get their market position. I don't think anybody could dispute that.
Yeah, and I think even now, like, they still have, like, weekly meetings at the White House. The top Google executives, they were basically even created by, like, top DARPA officials. I mean, yeah, when I look at government, when I look at Google, rather, it's hard to differentiate between them and the NSA.
Yeah, but I mean, if you kind of ignore all that, you look at, it is the biggest search engine, it is the biggest video service, it is the biggest email, or one of the biggest email companies, and they did get that way by providing a very user-friendly, easy service that people liked. But at the same point, they're so big right now. Like, I mean, what are we going to go on Bing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I use Bing.
Okay, but you're still using Google.
No, yeah, I use DuckDuckGo, and there's a
DuckDuckGo is amazing.
Yeah, there's an application called Disconnect, which it uses a proxy, and, like, it's Google, but it's not you using Google, it's their proxy. So you can get the best of both worlds.
Sure, but it doesn't, like, solve the issues. Like I was saying, a lot of people have an issue with Google's rampant content IDing and copyright strikes and DMCA claims. And I mean, it's really easy for somebody to just go onto your video and say, yeah, that's my content. And, like, even if they're wrong, even if they're lying, you still have 2 weeks where your video's down while you appeal it, and you still get a strike on your record if you don't appeal it. And I mean, so there's a lot of problems with Google that they have no incentive to fix, because where else are you going to go to get all the wealth of services that they provide? There's no direct competition to what Google actually does. Like, you might find another search engine. You might go down to, like, Vimeo or whatever the fuck to watch some videos. You might use Yahoo for email or whatever. But, like, to get the full package that they provide, no one else does that. And so they're not incentivized to respond to the consumer demand for certain things.
Do you think
I see this a lot in games.
What's that? Shit, I forgot what it's called. It used to be Justin TV.
Yeah.
What's it called now, though? It's like the video game thing. The shit.
Twitch.
Yeah. You think they're going to be a viable competitor with Google?
No, not really. On the video game market, they're already killing it. Like, live streaming video games, live streaming in general, they're absolutely like the dominant force. That's why Amazon bought them. Google wanted to buy them. Obviously, they weren't, stupid in the whole thing. And actually, it's funny because now YouTube is actually in a position where they're launching a live streaming video game service to try and compete with Amazon and Twitch. And so what I think is going to happen there is that they are going to provide the features that users want in that particular section, because they're the underdog, they're the competition. But in other things, like I was saying with Google Hangouts and with all these other things, if they're the dominant market force, they're not incentivized necessarily to give you what you need or what you want or the choice, or the controls or whatever it might be, especially because of their market scheme. Their marketing strategy and how they make money is advertisements. So it is a little different than, just handing somebody money for a product. It's a gray area. It's very different from what people normally consider as like a money-making thing. I mean, you are actually the product on Google, not the consumer. That they're actually selling you to advertisers. So that does change a lot of like the dynamics of the conversation, but I guess maybe it was a bad example because there's so many ifs and buts, and this thing's a little complicated and that thing's a gray area. But overall, it illustrates the point that if you are the top dog by such a massive margin, it's really easy to not be incentivized to give your consumer base what they want. Because where are they going to go? What's the alternative?
Well, I think that's certainly the case within the current paradigm. Especially within the telecommunications industry. I mean, look at shit like the FCC and all the regulate. You have to pay a fucking fee to the state to even broadcast a transmission over the airways. It's completely fucking ridiculous. And obviously in a free market, a competitor with Google would be much more conducive, and it would be unlikely probably that without the state and all the preferential treatment Google has been given, that they would even be have been able to attain such a position that they have otherwise. But I think it would be really interesting to see a free market in telecommunications, especially because we're now hearing lots of stuff about net neutrality and and have been for the last year, and this is supposed to be a way to save the to save the internet and all this stuff, and it's gonna have it's gonna have the complete opposite effect. We're fucked. That's why we need to. That's why I wanted to start kind of doing these shows while we can, before maybe we can't.
I mean,
anymore.
The common meme about the net neutrality that I had seen actually had nothing to do with either what was passed or even what was proposed. But you'd see everybody, Netflix is getting their bandwidth throttled because they're not playing ball. And it's like, well, that's how fucking business works. Like,
yeah. Like, who cares? Like, all these people, right? So, have like the TSA and the NSA and like, I mean, I don't wanna sound like a liberal or anything, but like little kids dying in Iraq and shit, and these people are just like sitting in their boxers watching Netflix. But then you mess with their Netflix, it's like, oh god, no, like let's lobby the government. Like
but,
that's what it takes. Because
here's
it
the
was
fucking
it was
problem
like a
with
huge
all of that.
popular uprising. Like,
They weren't gonna they weren't gonna fucking mess with Netflix. That's the thing. So Netflix was offered by Verizon and Comcast, hey, you can put your data in our data center. Therefore, it will get faster access to our customers. Verizon was told basically to fuck themselves. I think it's because Netflix only had the money to pay for one and the other, and Comcast is the dominant market force. And so they paid Comcast, and they put their fucking all their movies and shit in data centers right in Comcast areas. Like pretty much, there's one near you where all the Netflix movies are now there. So if you're on Comcast, you have fucking higher bandwidth, you get high definition, etc., etc. But they didn't pay Verizon, and Verizon, rightfully so, didn't have as fast access to them because they had to go through a third-party data center. And people were like, Verizon's throttling my Netflix. That's not what happened. Like, they paid for premium access at Comcast, and they got it, and they weren't willing at that time to pay for premium access. Maybe the price was too high. Maybe they thought it was unfeasible for whatever reason. And now all of a sudden they're like, please, government, come regulate my internet. And when in reality, the system that was there would have benefited the vast majority of people who use Netflix.
And the internet's so awesome. I mean, why would you even want to mess with the fucking internet? I just don't understand the thought processes of some people, man. The internet is so great because it is such a wild west,
I mean, the internet is what gives me hope for like the ideas of like voluntary and fucking free trade and everything. Like, you can see like covenant communities, all that. These natural communities arise on the internet, and yeah, they have a set of rules for when, like a forum, right? Or terms of service on Facebook or whatever it might be. There's these set of rules that you agree to. It's not a government. You agree to it. You consent to it. And if you act up, if you fucking act like a fool, well, the fucking now there is the problem of them changing the terms of service on people without notice, but like, you also agree to that. That's usually in most of these fucking contracts anyway. Like, I suggest people read, at least browse very quickly, terms of service before you agree to them. Just even if it's just the bullet points, like, you should probably do that. But regardless, it's the opposite of government on the internet, right? Like, you consent to anything you do. And these natural communities emerge, these natural trades happen. I mean, you look at eBay, Amazon, those things have facilitated more trade between individuals who otherwise wouldn't have been involved in any type of like one-on-one trade. People have made careers out of eBay, like lots of people, just becoming a merchant. And you never would have been able to sell these things in your local community, right? Like, you're having a yard sale every week or something. People think you're the weirdo in the community, but you go on eBay and there's somebody willing to pay like 10 times the price you would have got at a yard sale anyway, and it benefits everybody. Like, the internet is what has given me hope for like any type of voluntary or anarchist society. And the fact that they're trying to put it in the hands of governments is certainly an unsettling sign to see.
Absolutely. And to kind of get back to monopoly, and I was talking about political and voluntary entrepreneurs, and see, we've been discussing now political entrepreneurs like Google, who have meetings at the White House every week, who turn over their data to the NSA, who lobby for greater telecommunications regulations, etc. And like the companies that have now been on the behest of passing net neutrality in the United States, right? These people are scum and villainy, right? And so Yeah, it's real important to distinguish between political entrepreneurs and voluntary entrepreneurs. Historian Bert Folsom points out in his book, The Myth of the Robber Barons, and there'll be a link in the description box, a few examples of some of the entrepreneurs that we're told that we should despise because they were monocled capitalists that sucked the country dry and all this stuff. So Andrew Carnegie was one example, but he single-handedly reduced the price of steel rails from $160 per ton in 1875 to $17 per ton, nearly a quarter century later. John D. Rockefeller, who is villainized eternally, and yes, there's lots to be said about Rockefeller as and the Rockefeller Foundation and his involvement with central banking, etc. But as an entrepreneur, Rockefeller should be revered. I mean, he literally increased the wealth of every person in the country. I mean, he pushed the price of refined petroleum down from more than 30 cents a gallon to 5.9 cents a gallon in 1897. And he also reduced the price of kerosene from $1 a gallon to 10 cents a gallon. So the production process of Rockefeller, the refining process of Rockefeller, gave people a 90% raise in their energy consumption, right? And it was essentially only because of Rockefeller that people even became able to illuminate their homes. And this is when people were first starting to use kerosene and stuff, and could now have light at night and shit for cheap price, right? And like I said, we're told to hate Rockefeller, and as I mentioned, there are certain caveats. Carnegie, for example, supported steel tariffs at one point. Rockefeller's, like I said, involvement with central banking, and of course they were both part of the corporation system. But these are people and companies that are routinely brought up to imply monopoly, right? These were monopolists, and the truth of the matter is actually quite different. These people didn't operate free market monopoly. Standard Oil, for example, Rockefeller's Standard Oil, or oil, as you Northerners say it, acquired up to around 80 to 90% market share in the oil industry. And by the time the federal government finally even got around to breaking up the company in antitrust cases during 1911, Standard Oil's market share had already been reduced to just 25%, right? Through market competition. And as we were saying, see, competition prevents monopoly. Monopolies are impossible in a free market because there is always going to be a profit-seeking entrepreneur waiting in the wings to take share. And as we've already said, a statist system disincentivizes this process of entrepreneurs, and the selective privilege endowed onto these corporations. That's what creates monopoly. Like Google. So a good example of market entrepreneurship during around this same time was Cornelius Vanderbilt, who reduced fares on steamboat transit by 90, 95, and even 100%. So he even gave people free rides and just sold food and drinks and stuff on the ship. That's how he made his money, right? So yeah, and he did all this without any government subsidies. While the subsidized steamship industry at the time was a total failure. Another good example, Folsom points out in his book, The Myth of the Robber Barons, where these examples can be found, is a railroad entrepreneur, James J. Hill, who built the Great Northern Railroad without any government subsidy, while the other lines were building curve routes and shit to reap more government money for every mile of track they laid. And there's actually the AMC show Hell on Wheels actually illustrates this. It shows the main antagonist of who's this crony capitalist that is building this railroad, and is, I think it's like on the first episode. I couldn't believe they actually portrayed it like this. It was very interesting, refreshing to see on a TV show. But yeah, like on the first episode, like one of his accountants or some shit go in, and he's like, well, we need to lay this track straight, and he's like, no, we're going to do it fucking 40-mile curves out of the way, and the accountant can't understand why, and he's like, you're fired, get out of here. So yeah, see, the government was subsidizing the railroad entrepreneurs, the industrialists, per mile of track they laid. So this creates a perverse incentive, right? Because they're going to take the most impractical route because it's going to net them more miles and thus more subsidy money. So we don't need public finance, right? But public finance only perverts things. And one of the standard objections to the free society is, well, we can't have roads or infrastructure without the state. And I just bring up these examples: James J. Hill and the Great Northern Railroad, Cornelius Vanderbilt and his steamship industry as some of the more glaring examples that proves that's just absolutely not true. So yeah, I'm getting to the point that the people like this, these voluntary entrepreneurs, are benefactors of mankind, right? They're not monocled villains, but we hear about them, that we hear in textbooks, that we hear about in the textbooks, right? That these people were rampant monopoly men that had to be reined in by a benevolent government, that monopoly was everywhere, and, well, we needed government to save us from capitalism. And it's just simply not true. It's complete bullshit. You just want to ask yourself, right, why would government want to tell you in its schools with its textbooks from the mouths of its employees that you need it? Right? I think we should think about that. There's certainly an interest to do that, right? Because if you're brought up believing that, you're going to think that, well, you need it, right? We can't have capitalism run amok. My 6th grade textbook told me so, that Rockefeller was a monopolist and was evil. So we need regulation. We need the state. So yeah, it's simply not true. But it's alleged, by these court economists and various other state violence apologists that these people and the various firms that they operated is during the laissez-faire period of the United States, this is what consolidated monopolies, with the tactic of predatory pricing. And we'll talk about predatory pricing. But I'll let anybody else speak it now if they want to.
I think you summed it up pretty well.
For shizzle.
I don't really have much to add.
Okay, so we got about 15 minutes left. We'll cover predatory pricing, and then we will peace out to you, mongooses. And until next week. So predatory pricing is the theoretical economic phenomenon where a company lowers its prices, possibly even below costs, in an attempt to drive rivals out of the market. So the predatory firm is then expected to increase prices after competitors have been forced out, right, to a level that allows them to recoup any losses during the predation period where they lowered prices. Right, now, some of this information is coming from an article, I think it's called The Misplaced Fear of Monopoly by Thomas Woods. That's linked up in the description box as well. But he mentions the work of several others that's pertinent to what we've been trying to get across here. So I thought I'd mention it here in the end. So beyond the appeal to specific examples of history, Woods says, critics of the market propose plausible-sounding scenarios in which firms might be able to harm consumer welfare. So larger firms can afford to lower their prices, even below cost, right? It is theorized, the predatory pricing model. So as long as it takes to drive their smaller competitors out of business, at least the major argument runs. So once this task is accomplished, the larger firms can raise prices and take advantage of consumers who no longer have any choice but to buy from them. So yeah, this is predatory pricing, or the theory of predatory pricing. So Thomas DiLorenzo looked in his work in the I believe it was 1985, and he includes this information in The Myth of Natural Monopoly, which is linked in the description box as well. But he looked at firms who were alleged to have restricted production and raised prices. The companies during the laissez-faire period of United States so-called capitalism, and found that 17 industries had available data for accusations of monopoly. So remember, by the definition of monopoly and this predatory pricing variant, you have to be restricting output and raising costs. So what did DiLorenzo find? He found the exact opposite, of course. Output rose 175% during the 1880s. Prices fell, and this is a natural result of a gold-backed currency. You know, how wealth is increased in the free market is prices fall, right? Such abundance is created by the market system relative to the amount of commodity money that's in circulation that your prices fall, and you can buy more stuff with the same amount of money, right? That's how people are supposed to get rich, right? That's how you get rich in a market economy. So during this time, prices were already falling. They were falling by 7%, but they were falling much more substantially in the industries that were allegedly monopolized. So it's the exact opposite. There's never been historical monopolies ever that fit the definition, that have lasted any significant length of time or have not been propped up by the state ever. So, you know, likewise, Dominic Armentano, who professor of economics, University of Harvard, who DiLorenzo and Folsom and Woods and others have really built off of I believe his 1975 work, Antitrust and Monopoly, which is linked in the description box as well, surveyed scores of important antitrust cases as well, and failed to uncover a single successful example of predatory pricing. So why can't this occur? Well, for one thing, a large firm attempting predatory pricing is going to have to endure losses relative to its economy of scale. So, in other words, a firm holding, say, 90% of the market, competing with a firm holding the remaining 10% of the market, suffers losses on its 90% market share, right? And Woods points out George Reisman and some of his arguments, which come from Capitalism, which I have not read and don't know anyone personally who has, as it is a 1,000+ page behemoth. But yeah, so Reisman in Capitalism wonders what is supposed to be so brilliant and irresistible about a strategy that involves having a firm, albeit one with 9 times the wealth and 9 times the business, lose money, right, at a rate 9 times as great as the losses suffered by its competitors. So the dominant firm, should it somehow succeed in driving all competitors from the market, must now drive prices back up to enjoy its windfall, without at the same time encouraging new entrants who will be attracted by the prospect of charging those high prices themselves into the field, right? So then the predatory pricing strategy has to begin all over again, further postponing the moment when the hoped for premium profits kick in, right? So new entrants into the fields will be in a particularly strong position, since they can often acquire the assets of the previous firms who had been driven out of the market at very low prices during bankruptcy proceedings. So if a company was even successful in predatory pricing and it's driving all their competitors out, right? New entrants into the market are going to be able to pick up that line of production at much lower costs and enter it, right? So predatory pricing is just infeasible on many levels. But during the period of the below cost pricing, as well, it's important to mention that consumers tend to stock up, right, on the unusually inexpensive goods. So this factor means it'll take longer for the dominant firm to recoup the losses it incurred from its predatory pricing. So just in summary, the recouping of losses, which is essential for a predatory pricing strategy, just can't occur because rival firms could just exit the market when prices are lowered and re-enter when prices are increased. If rival firms are forced out of the market when prices are increased by a predatory firm, this could induce new competitors in the market. The predatory firm must have a supply large enough to meet all the demand at the lower price. If its capacity is not great enough, prices will rise again. And finally, if the predatory firm were to repeatedly lower prices when rivals re-entered the market, the rival firms could short the dominant firm's stock in an attempt to make up for losses resulting from the lower price. So yeah, this is something that's often brought up within the context of monopoly, predatory pricing. So I just wanted to hit on it quickly, or as quickly as I could. But yeah, that looks like it's probably going to be a good place to end and get people's final thoughts. I had a few more stuff prepared, but I think we can do without it, as I've talked enough tonight. But I will open up the internal here for final thoughts, plug any channels or blogs or anything, and outros, and then we'll say goodbye. Adam?
Yeah, so if you're gonna read anything from the little like sidebar thing, if you're gonna just read one thing, make it the use of knowledge in society by Hayek. So I think it really drives the point home about prices and so on.
Cool. Max?
I think we condensed some very big topics into a somewhat short amount of time, considering. So I think everything went pretty well. There's obviously a lot more, but there's always next week, right?
For sure. Jefferson?
Yeah, I would recommend Human Action, Mises. Yeah, that's it really. I'm an admin for Emancipated Human on Facebook if you want to follow me. Yeah.
What's the page?
Emancipated Human.
Okay, cool.
Just search for it on Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, and check out all these guys' channels. They post some videos every now and then, so check them out. I'll probably add some, if they want, links to their channel pages in the description, and if you want to check them out. So I am Asa J. Just talk a little bit about the trajectory of events in terms of the show for a moment. Yeah, so we're probably going to do one more show that's not open panel. That's it, I promise. And then we're going to start opening panels up. So the last stuff I wanted to get to tonight, we can make a whole show out of next time. And I really wanted to lay out, see, in the first episode, the moral argument for liberty. In this show, the practical or the economic or utilitarian argument for liberty. And then next week we're going to look at the stateless society and how that could function. So definitely tune in again next week, and help us out. Share this video around. Try to get it out. Try to post it to some of your Federalist or Constitutionalist friends. We're probably, like I said, we're probably going to do a closed panel next week, followed by an open panel, and which I'm not sure. There might be one more Sunday in the month this week, but on the last Sunday we will be having the Radical Talk, anything goes, no hold bars, open panel chat where all of you are welcome to come and discuss anything you want live on the air. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And so yeah, I'm Asa J. This is Unleashing Liberty Live. I'll pop out to the external and give some shout outs for the few that have attended tonight. Neoclassical Nazi, what do you say, man? Thanks for joining us. The Radical Hick, what do you say, dude? Politically Incorrect, Don, what do you say, brother? I'm definitely wanting to get your input when we start opening up these panels, and so yeah, I'll talk to you. Got Behave Yourself and Max out there. Raising hell as well. If I missed you, thanks for watching anyway, and if you're watching and not chatting, thank you as well. But yeah, I'm Asa J. If you want to check out my work documenting the police state, you can check me out on copblock.org and policestatedaily.com, and that will about do it. Peace, frogs.